The smell of sawdust and sweat clung to my work clothes as I walked through the front door of our suburban home at midnight. Another 16-hour day renovating the old Peterson house had left my muscles screaming, but the overtime pay would help cover Laura's latest shopping spree. I kicked off my steel-toed boots and headed toward the kitchen for a beer when I heard voices coming from our home office. "Jake, you need to understand something," Laura's voice carried through the thin walls. She was talking to her brother again. "My husband is a simple contractor. He doesn't understand complex financial arrangements like we do." I froze in the hallway, my hand still reaching for the refrigerator handle. "The insurance money from Mom's accident should go toward something meaningful," Jake's nasal voice replied, "not toward fixing up some blue-collar nobody's construction projects." My jaw clenched. Laura's mother had died in a car accident 6 months ago, leaving behind a substantial life insurance payout that Laura had inherited. We'd discussed using part of it to expand my construction business, maybe hire another crew. I'd been working my ass off for 15 years, building something from nothing. I know, Laura continued. "But Mike thinks he deserves an equal say in how we spend it. Can you believe that? Like his little hammer and nails operation is some kind of real business." The beer bottle slipped from my fingers and shattered on the kitchen tile. The conversation in the office went silent. "Mike, is that you?" Laura called out, her voice suddenly sweet as honey. "Yeah, it's me." I swept up the glass, each shard catching the overhead light like tiny accusations. "Just getting cleaned up." Laura appeared in the kitchen doorway, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. She was still wearing her real estate blazer, the one that cost more than I made in a week. Behind her lurked Jake, all 6'3" of entitled smugness. His designer polo shirt probably worth more than my truck payment. "How was work, honey?" Laura asked, but her eyes were already calculating, trying to figure out how much I'd overheard. "Long day," I replied, dumping the glass shards into the trash. "What were you two discussing so intensely?" Jake stepped forward, his chest puffed out like a rooster. "We were talking about responsible financial planning, something you might not understand given your background." "My background?" I straightened up, meeting his gaze. At 5'10", I had to look up at him, but 15 years of construction work had given me shoulders that could carry steel beams. "You mean the background where I actually work for a living?" Jake didn't mean anything by that, Laura interjected quickly, but I could see the irritation flickering in her green eyes. "We were just discussing investment opportunities." "With your mother's insurance money," I said flatly. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Laura's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the door frame. "That money is mine, Mike, legally and morally. Mom left it to me, not to us." Her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness now, and I think it would be better invested in something with actual growth potential. "Like what?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to hear the answer. Jake smirked. "Like my new real estate development company. Laura's going to be my partner. We're looking at some prime commercial properties downtown." "Partner," I repeated slowly. "And where exactly do I fit into this partnership?" Laura's laugh was like breaking glass. "Mike, be realistic. You're a contractor. A good one, sure, but this is big business. This is about building something that matters. Something that matters. 15 years of marriage, and she was telling me that everything I'd built didn't matter. The successful business I'd grown from nothing. The house we lived in, that I'd renovated with my own hands. The life we'd created together." "I see," I said quietly. "So my opinion doesn't count when it comes to $250,000 that could change our lives." "It's not our money," Jake said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's Laura's money. And frankly, she needs to start thinking about her future with someone who can actually provide for her properly." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. I looked at Laura, waiting for her to defend me, to tell her brother he was out of line. Instead, she looked away. "Maybe we should discuss this tomorrow," she said, "when everyone's had time to cool down." But I was already walking toward the stairs. "Don't worry about it, Laura." Message received, loud and clear. As I climbed the steps to our bedroom, I heard Jake's voice behind me. "He'll get over it. Guys like him always do. They don't have any other choice." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Laura pretended to sleep beside me. 24 hours ago, I'd thought I had a solid marriage, good friends, and a bright future. Now I was questioning everything I thought I knew about my life. I'd built this house with my own hands. I'd worked double shifts to pay for Laura's real estate license. I'd supported her through every career change and wild dream, and now she and her brother were planning to cut me out of the biggest financial opportunity we'd ever had. But what hurt most wasn't the money. It was the casual way they dismissed everything I'd accomplished. Like 15 years of marriage meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. I rolled over and looked at Laura's sleeping form. In the moonlight, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with in college. But that woman would never have let her brother talk about me the way Jake had tonight. Tomorrow, I decided, things were going to change. I just didn't know how much. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed and the smell of expensive coffee brewing downstairs. Laura always bought the good stuff from that boutique shop downtown. Another small luxury that cost 3 times what regular coffee did. I used to think it was cute, her little indulgences. Now it felt like another reminder of how different we'd become. I pulled on jeans and a work shirt and headed downstairs. Laura was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone with one hand and holding a steaming mug with the other. She was already dressed for work in another one of her power suits, this one navy blue with silver buttons that caught the morning light. "Morning," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot. "Good morning." She didn't look up from her phone. "I have 3 showings today, so I'll be home late. There's leftover Chinese in the fridge for dinner." I sat down across from her, studying her face. "Laura, about last night. Let's not do this right now, Mike." She finally looked up, and I could see the wall she'd built behind her eyes. "I have a busy day ahead." "So do I, but we need to talk about this." She sighed and set down her phone with the dramatic flair she'd perfected over the years. "Fine. What do you want to talk about?" "I want to talk about the fact that you and your brother are planning to invest your mother's insurance money without even discussing it with me. I want to talk about the fact that he insulted me in my own home and you said nothing. Jake can be direct, but he's not wrong, Mike. This is a big opportunity, and it requires a certain level of business sophistication." Business sophistication. I tasted the words like they were poison. Is that what we're calling it? Laura stood up and smoothed down her skirt. "I don't have time for this conversation right now." "We can talk tonight." "No, we can't, because you just said you'll be home late." I stood up too, blocking her path to the door. "We're going to talk about this now." For a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance. I'd always been the accommodating husband, the one who worked around her schedule, who supported her dreams without question. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "What exactly do you want to know?" "I want to know when you decided that my opinion doesn't matter. I want to know when you decided that 15 years of marriage doesn't entitle me to have a say in major financial decisions. It's not your money, Mike, but it affects our life together. It affects our future. Or are you planning a future that doesn't include me?" The question hung in the air between us. Laura's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the guilt that flashed across her face. "Don't be dramatic," she said finally. "Of course our future includes you. But that doesn't mean you get to control how I invest my inheritance. I'm not trying to control anything. I'm trying to be your partner. Remember partnership? That thing we promised each other 15 years ago?" Laura's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it reflexively. "I really do have to go. Mrs. Henderson is looking at that colonial on Maple Street, and it's a big commission. She tried to step around me, but I didn't move. Laura, I'm serious about this. We need to figure out how to move forward together, or we need to figure out if we're moving forward at all." Something cold settled in her green eyes. "Are you threatening me, Mike?" "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm asking my wife to treat me like her husband, instead of like some hired help who doesn't deserve a voice in our life together." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating. This was the woman who'd built a successful real estate career by reading people, by knowing exactly what to say to close a deal. But I wasn't a client, and our marriage wasn't a transaction. "You're right," she said finally. "You deserve to be part of the conversation. How about this? Come to dinner with Jake and me tomorrow night. We can discuss the investment opportunity properly." I should have felt relieved, but something in her tone set off alarm bells. "Where?" "That new steakhouse downtown, the one Jake's been wanting to try." Of course, the most expensive restaurant in town, the kind of place where Jake could hold court and make me feel like an outsider. But at least it was something. "Okay," I said, "tomorrow night." Laura smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Great. I'll make reservations for 7. She kissed my cheek quickly, and headed for the door. Have a good day at work, honey. After she left, I sat in the empty kitchen, drinking coffee and trying to shake the feeling that I'd just been played. Laura had agreed to include me, but on her terms, in her brother's territory. It felt less like a compromise and more like a setup. My phone rang, interrupting my brooding. It was Danny Morrison, my best friend since high school and the foreman on my biggest crew. Hey Mike, you ready for another fun day of dealing with the Peterson house's plumbing nightmares? As ready as anyone can be for 70-year-old pipes and a client who changes his mind every 5 minutes. Danny laughed. That's the spirit. Hey, Lisa and I were thinking about having you and Laura over for dinner this weekend. It's been too long since we all hung out together. Danny and Lisa Morrison had been our closest friends for over a decade. Danny had been my best man, and Laura had been Lisa's maid of honor. We'd vacationed together, celebrated holidays together, been there for each other through good times and bad. That sounds great, I said. I'll check with Laura tonight. Cool. Lisa's been experimenting with some new recipes she saw on that cooking show. Fair warning, we might be guinea pigs. After I hung up, I realized that dinner with the Morrisons sounded like exactly what Laura and I needed. A reminder of the life we'd built together, the friendships we'd cultivated, the normal, middle-class happiness we'd shared before inheritance money and business opportunities complicated everything. But first, I had to get through tomorrow night's dinner with Jake, and something told me it was going to be a lot more challenging than Lisa Morrison's experimental cooking. I grabbed my work boots and headed out to face another day of honest labor, trying not to think about how my wife had made honest labor sound like a character flaw. The Peterson house was a 1950s colonial that had been beautiful once, before decades of neglect and bad renovation choices had turned it into a contractor's nightmare. But I've been working on it for 3 months now, and it was finally starting to look like a home again. As I pulled up to the job site, I saw Danny's truck already parked in the driveway. He was sitting on the front steps, drinking coffee from a thermos and scrolling through something on his tablet. "You're here early," I called out as I grabbed my tool belt from the truck. Couldn't sleep. Lisa's been having those weird pregnancy cravings again. She woke me up at 4 a.m. asking for pickles and ice cream. I'd forgotten that Lisa was pregnant with their second child. Danny had been glowing about it for weeks, talking about converting their spare bedroom into a nursery, about how excited their 5-year-old daughter Emma was to be a big sister. How's she feeling? Good. Tired, but good. The doctor says everything's progressing perfectly. Danny's face lit up the way it always did when he talked about his family. Emma's already picked out names. She wants to call the baby Princess Sparkles if it's a girl, and Truck Monster if it's a boy. I laughed despite my mood. Those are solid choices. That's what I told her. Danny stood up and stretched. "So what's got you looking like someone stole your lunch money?" Danny had always been able to read me like an open book. We'd known each other since we were 17, had started our construction business together right out of high school. He was more than my business partner. He was the brother I'd never had. Laura and I had a fight last night. About what? I told him about the insurance money, about Jake's involvement, about the way they'd talked about me like I wasn't worth consulting. Danny listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every detail. "That's bullshit, Mike," he said when I finished. "You've been married for 15 years. Of course you should have a say in how that money gets invested. Laura says it's legally hers. Legal and right aren't always the same thing." Danny picked up his tool belt and slung it around his waist. "What are you going to do?" "I'm having dinner with them tomorrow night." "Laura says we'll discuss it properly." Danny snorted. "Let me guess. Jake picked the restaurant." "How'd you know?" "Because guys like Jake always need home field advantage. They can't win a fair fight, so they stack the deck." We spent the morning working on the Peterson house's kitchen, replacing cabinets and installing new countertops. The physical labor felt good, familiar. This was work I understood, problems I could solve with the right tools and enough effort. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Laura. "Dinner tomorrow at Morton's Steakhouse, 7 p.m. Dress nicely." Morton's Steakhouse, the most expensive restaurant in town, the kind of place where entrees started at $50 and went up from there. Jake's favorite kind of power play. I showed Danny the text, and he shook his head. "You know what this is, right? This is them trying to make you feel out of place. They're going to order expensive wine and talk about investment strategies and make you feel like the hired help. Maybe, but at least I'll be part of the conversation. Will you? Or will you just be there so they can say they included you before they do whatever they were planning to do anyway? I didn't have an answer for that, but I knew I had to try. 15 years of marriage was worth fighting for, even if the fight was rigged from the start. That afternoon, as we finished installing the last of the kitchen cabinets, I found myself thinking about the future Laura and Jake were planning. A real estate development company. Commercial properties. Big business. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was thinking too small. I'd built a successful construction business, but it wasn't going to make me rich. I employed 8 people full-time and had enough work booked to stay busy for the next 6 months. But I wasn't building an empire. But did that make me less worthy of respect? Did that make my opinion worthless? Tomorrow night, I was going to find out. I spent 20 minutes that evening standing in front of my closet, trying to figure out what dress nicely meant for dinner at Morton's Steakhouse. I owned exactly 2 suits, the one I'd gotten married in, and the one I wore to funerals. Both were at least 5 years old and probably out of style, but they were what I had. I settled on the wedding suit, navy blue with a white shirt and the silk tie Laura had bought me for our 10th anniversary. Looking at myself in the bedroom mirror, I looked like exactly what I was, a working man trying to dress up for his wife's world. Laura emerged from the bathroom in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her makeup was flawless. She looked beautiful and expensive, and completely out of my league. "You look nice," she said. But her eyes were already calculating whether I'd pass muster at Jake's chosen restaurant. "Thanks, you look beautiful." She smiled, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the woman I'd married. But then she glanced at her watch, and the moment passed. "We should go." Jake hates it when people are late. The drive to Morton's was quiet, except for the soft jazz playing on Laura's preferred radio station. I tried to make conversation, but her responses were distracted, monosyllabic. She was already mentally at the restaurant, preparing for whatever performance she and Jake had planned. Morton's Steakhouse occupied the ground floor of the newest office building downtown. All glass and steel and modern pretension. The valet parking attendant looked like he made more money than most of my crew. I handed over the keys to my 5-year-old pickup truck and tried not to feel embarrassed when he parked it behind a row of BMWs and Mercedes. Jake was already waiting at the bar, nursing what looked like an expensive scotch and checking his phone. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, and his shoes were so polished they reflected the restaurant's ambient lighting. "Laura! Mike!" He stood up and embraced his sister with the kind of theatrical affection that always seemed calculated for an audience. He shook my hand with just enough pressure to let me know he was still trying to prove something. "Hope you don't mind, but I went ahead and got us a table," Jake said, leading us toward the dining room. "I know the manager here. We do a lot of business together." Of course he did. Jake had a talent for dropping casual mentions of his connections, his deals, his importance. It was like watching a peacock display its feathers. The hostess led us to a corner table with a view of the city lights. The kind of table you had to know someone to get. The kind that announced to the entire restaurant that you were important enough to matter. "This is nice," I said, settling into the leather chair. "I thought you'd like it," Jake replied, though his tone suggested he thought no such thing. "The steaks here are incredible. They fly the beef in from Nebraska twice a week." A waiter appeared immediately, as if summoned by Jake's presence. "Good evening, Mr. Patterson." "The usual?" "Actually, let's start with a bottle of the Camus Cabernet, the 2018. Jake glanced at me. "You do drink wine, don't you, Mike?" "Sure." I knew enough about wine to know that Camus was expensive, and Jake knew I knew it. This was all part of the show. Laura was studying her menu with the intensity of a scholar reading ancient texts. "Everything looks wonderful. I can't decide between the filet and the lobster." "Get both," Jake said expansively. "We're celebrating, after all." "Celebrating what?" I asked. Jake's smile was sharp as a blade. "Laura didn't tell you? We finalized the paperwork on our first property today, a beautiful office complex on the north side of town. Prime location, incredible potential." I looked at Laura, who was suddenly very interested in her wine glass. "I thought we were here to discuss the investment opportunity." "We are," Jake said. "We're discussing how successful it's already becoming." The waiter returned with the wine, going through the elaborate ritual of presenting the bottle, pouring a taste for Jake's approval, filling our glasses with ceremonial precision. I watched the performance and wondered how much of our evening was going to be theater. So, Jake continued once the waiter had departed, let me tell you about the vision Laura and I have for Patterson Development. Patterson Development. Not Patterson-Sullivan Development. Not even Sullivan-Patterson Development. Just Patterson. As if I didn't exist. We're looking at commercial real estate as the foundation, but the real money is in mixed-use developments. Office space, retail, high-end residential. The kind of projects that transform entire neighborhoods. Jake pulled out his phone and started swiping through photos. This is the property we just closed on. 12,000 square feet, currently occupied by a bunch of small businesses paying below market rent, but the location is perfect for redevelopment. I looked at the photos. It was a strip of older buildings on Harrison Street, including Murphy's hardware store, where I'd been buying supplies for 15 years. The family that owned it had been there for 3 generations. What happens to the current tenants? I asked. Jake shrugged. Market forces. Their leases are up for renewal next year. We'll offer them new terms that reflect the true value of the location. And if they can't afford the new terms, then they'll find somewhere else to do business. That's how capitalism works, Mike. Laura finally looked up from her wine. Jake, maybe we should explain the whole plan before we get into specifics. But Jake was on a roll now, energized by his own vision of success. The beauty of this business is the leverage. Laura's inheritance gives us the down payment, but we can finance the rest. Within 5 years, we could own 6 properties. Within 10 years, we could be the biggest commercial real estate company in the state. What about the construction side? I asked. If you're planning major renovations, you'll need reliable contractors. Jake's laugh was like breaking glass. Oh, we'll definitely need contractors. But we're talking about million-dollar projects here. We'll need firms with experience in large-scale commercial development. The message was clear. I wasn't qualified for their world. My 15 years of experience, my reputation for quality work, my knowledge of local building codes and regulations, none of it mattered because I'd never built a skyscraper. Mike's company does excellent work, Laura said, but her voice lacked conviction. He's renovated some beautiful homes. I'm sure he has, Jake replied with condescending kindness. But residential and commercial are completely different animals. The insurance requirements alone would probably bankrupt a small operation. I took a sip of wine and tried to keep my voice level. So where exactly do I fit into this partnership? Well, that's the thing, Jake said, leaning forward like he was about to share a secret. This isn't really a partnership in the traditional sense. Laura is the investor. I'm the developer. We're the principals. And I'm what? The silent partner? You're Laura's husband, Jake said, as if that explained everything. You'll benefit from the profits, of course, but the day-to-day operations require specialized knowledge that takes years to develop. I looked at Laura, waiting for her to say something, to defend me, to remind her brother that I'd been successfully running a business since before he'd graduated from college. Instead, she was studying the menu again. I see, I said quietly. The waiter returned to take our orders. Jake ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, Laura chose the lobster, and I asked for the cheapest option I could find. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because I was starting to understand that this entire evening was about putting me in my place. Over dinner, Jake regaled us with stories about his business connections, his investment strategies, his plans for expanding into other markets. Laura hung on his every word like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. I ate my steak and wondered when my wife had decided that her brother's approval was more important than her husband's partnership. The key, Jake was saying, is to think bigger than the competition. While other developers are fighting over residential properties, we're positioning ourselves in the commercial market. Higher margins, longer-term leases, more stable income. What about the risk, I asked. Commercial real estate can be volatile. Jake's expression suggested I just asked whether the earth was round. Every investment involves risk, Mike. But calculated risk is how fortunes are made. Playing it safe is how people stay poor. The implication was clear. I was poor because I played it safe. Never mind that I'd built a successful business from nothing, employed 8 people, owned my home outright, and had never missed a payment on anything in my life. I was poor because I didn't think big enough. Mike's always been conservative with money, Laura said, and I couldn't tell if she meant it as a compliment or an apology. Nothing wrong with being conservative, Jake replied magnanimously, but sometimes you have to take risks to achieve real success. By the time dessert arrived, I understood exactly what this dinner had been about. It wasn't a discussion or a negotiation. It was an announcement. Laura and Jake had already decided what they were going to do with the inheritance money. They had already formed their partnership, made their plans, chosen their path forward. I was here because Laura needed to be able to say she'd included me in the conversation. But my opinion had never mattered. My concerns were irrelevant. My 15 years of marriage, my successful business, my dreams for our future together, none of it was important enough to factor into their calculations. "Well," Jake said, raising his wine glass, "here's to Patterson Development and the beginning of something big." Laura raised her glass with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I raised mine too, because what else was I supposed to do? But as I drank the toast to their success, I was already planning my next move. Because if my wife and her brother thought they could dismiss me like some hired help, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The check arrived, and Jake made a show of grabbing it. "This one's on me. Consider it a celebration of our new venture." As we walked toward the valet stand, Laura linked her arm through mine. "That went well, don't you think?" I looked down at her, this woman I'd loved for 15 years, and realized I was looking at a stranger. "Yeah," I said. It went exactly like I expected. The next few weeks passed in a blur of polite conversations and careful distances. Laura threw herself into the Patterson Development project with the enthusiasm she'd once reserved for our marriage. She spent her evenings on conference calls with Jake, her weekends touring properties, her free time researching zoning laws and building codes. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and staying late at job sites to avoid going home to a house that no longer felt like mine. Danny noticed the change immediately. "You're working yourself to death," he said one Thursday afternoon as we finished installing hardwood floors in the Peterson house's living room. "When's the last time you took a day off?" "I'll take a day off when the work's done." "The work's never done, Mike. That's the point of running a business." Danny was right, of course, but work was the only place where I still felt competent, still felt valued. At home, I was just the husband who didn't understand business, who thought too small, who wasn't sophisticated enough for his wife's new world. "Laura and I are having some problems," I admitted. "I figured. You haven't mentioned her in weeks, and she hasn't been returning Lisa's calls." That was news to me. Laura and Lisa had been close friends for years, shopping together, having lunch dates, sharing the kind of easy intimacy that came from years of shared experiences. "What do you mean she hasn't been returning calls?" Danny looked uncomfortable. "Lisa's been trying to reach her about dinner this weekend. She's called 3 times and sent a couple of texts. Laura keeps saying she's too busy. Too busy for Lisa Morrison, but not too busy for endless meetings with Jake about commercial real estate." The message was becoming clearer every day. Laura was moving into a new world, and the people from her old life were no longer important enough to matter. "Maybe I should talk to her," I said. "Maybe you should. Lisa's feelings are hurt, and you know how pregnancy hormones can amplify everything." That evening, I found Laura in the home office, surrounded by spreadsheets and property surveys. She was wearing reading glasses and had her hair pulled back in a messy bun, looking more like a college student cramming for finals than a successful real estate agent. "Hey," I said from the doorway. "Hey yourself." She didn't look up from her laptop screen. "How was work?" "Good. We finished the Peterson floors today. The whole house should be done by next week." "That's nice." I waited for her to ask more questions, to show interest in the project I'd been working on for months. Instead, she kept typing. "Laura, Lisa Morrison has been trying to reach you about dinner this weekend." That got her attention. She looked up, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. "I've been swamped with the Harrison Street project. Jake wants to submit our renovation proposal by Monday. It's one dinner with friends we've known for 10 years. Laura sighed and pulled off her reading glasses. "Mike, I know Lisa's your friend's wife, but honestly, we don't have that much in common anymore." "You used to have plenty in common." "That was before. Things change. People grow in different directions." "What's that supposed to mean?" Laura stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our suburban street with its neat lawns and modest houses. "It means that Lisa's idea of excitement is trying a new recipe she saw on Pinterest. She's never traveled anywhere more exotic than Florida. She thinks a big financial decision is whether to buy name brand cereal or generic." The contempt in her voice was like a slap in the face. "She's having a baby, Laura. She's building a family with someone she loves. Those used to be things you valued. I still value them, but I also value ambition, growth, the desire to build something meaningful. And what Lisa and Danny are building isn't meaningful? Laura turned back to face me, and I could see the wall behind her eyes growing higher. They're building a nice, small, safe life. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not what I want anymore. And what do you want? I want to matter. I want to build something that will last, something that will make a difference. I want to be more than just another suburban housewife gossiping about recipes and school fundraisers. Is that what you think I want you to be? I think you want me to be satisfied with what we have, and I'm not satisfied anymore, Mike. I want more. The honesty was brutal, but at least it was honest. Laura wasn't just rejecting Lisa Morrison's friendship. She was rejecting the entire life we'd built together. So where does that leave us? I asked. Laura's expression softened slightly. It leaves us figuring out how to grow together instead of apart. This development project could change everything for us, Mike. We could have the kind of life we've only dreamed about. I thought we already had a pretty good life. We had a fine life, but don't you want something more than fine? I looked around the office, at the house I'd renovated with my own hands, at the evidence of 15 years of shared dreams and mutual support. Maybe it wasn't glamorous, but it had been ours. I guess I thought what we had was already more than fine, I said. Laura moved closer and put her hand on my arm. It can be even better. Trust me on this. But trust was becoming harder to come by. Over the next few days, I watched Laura transform into someone I barely recognized. She started dressing differently, talking differently, carrying herself with a new kind of confidence that seemed to require looking down on everything she'd been before. The breaking point came the following Saturday. Danny and Lisa had invited us to Emma's 6th birthday party. A backyard barbecue with cake and games and the kind of simple family celebration that used to make Laura smile. I can't go, Laura announced that morning. Jake scheduled a meeting with potential investors. On Saturday? At a 6-year-old's birthday party? Business doesn't stop for birthday parties, Mike. These investors are only in town for the weekend. Emma's been looking forward to seeing you. You promised her you'd be there. Laura's expression hardened. I'm sure she'll survive my absence. Children are remarkably resilient. I stared at my wife, this woman who used to bake cookies for Emma, who used to read her bedtime stories when we babysat, who used to talk about wanting children of our own someday. Who are you? I asked quietly. I'm someone who's finally figured out what she wants from life. I went to Emma's party alone, making excuses for Laura that tasted like ash in my mouth. Lisa was polite but distant, clearly hurt by Laura's repeated rejections. Danny tried to keep things light, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Where's Aunt Laura? Emma asked as I handed her the present we'd bought together the week before. She had to work, sweetheart, but she wanted me to tell you happy birthday. Emma's face fell with the particular disappointment that only children can express so purely. She promised she'd help me blow out the candles. I'll help you blow out the candles, I said, but we both knew it wasn't the same thing. Later, as I helped Danny clean up the backyard, he finally asked the question I'd been dreading. What's really going on with you and Laura? I told him everything. The inheritance money, Jake's development company, the dinner at Morton's, Laura's growing contempt for our old life and friends. Danny listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every detail. She's lost her mind, he said when I finished. Or her brothers brainwashed her. Either way, this isn't going to end well. What do you mean? Danny threw a paper plate into the trash bag with more force than necessary. I mean, guys like Jake don't build partnerships. They build empires, with themselves at the center. Laura thinks she's going to be his equal partner, but she's really just his bankroll. She's not stupid, Danny. She's built a successful real estate career. Residential real estate. Selling houses to families like us. Commercial development is a completely different game with completely different rules. Jake knows those rules, and Laura doesn't. So what are you saying? I'm saying your wife is about to get screwed by her own brother, and she's too blinded by ambition to see it coming. That night, I lay in bed listening to Laura talk excitedly about the investor meeting, about the potential for expanding into retail development, about Jake's vision for creating a commercial real estate empire. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, I almost got caught up in her dreams. But then I remembered Emma's disappointed face, Lisa's hurt silence, the casual way Laura had dismissed 15 years of friendship for a business meeting with strangers. "Laura," I said, when she finally paused for breath. "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" "The life we had before all this. The quiet evenings, the dinners with friends, the simple pleasure of being together without always planning the next big move." Laura was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "No," she said. "I don't miss it at all." And that's when I knew our marriage was over. Not legally, not officially, but in every way that mattered. The woman lying next to me wasn't the woman I'd married. She was someone else entirely. Someone who valued ambition over loyalty, success over love, the promise of more over the reality of what we'd already built together. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my mind was already working on a different problem. How to protect myself from the wreckage that was coming. Because Danny was right about one thing. This wasn't going to end well. And when it all fell apart, I needed to make sure I wasn't buried in the rubble. 3 months later, I was proven right in the worst possible way. I came home from work on a Tuesday evening to find Laura sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and wearing the shell-shocked expression of someone who'd just been hit by a truck. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Laura looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Jake's gone." "Gone where?" "Gone. Disappeared. With all the money." I sat down across from her, studying the papers scattered across the table. Legal agreements, bank statements, property deeds, all bearing Jake Patterson's signature and none bearing Laura's. "What do you mean, all the money?" Laura's voice was barely a whisper. "The inheritance. The money from Mom's insurance. It's gone. All of it." I picked up one of the bank statements. The Patterson development account showed a balance of $0.00. The last transaction was a wire transfer for the full amount, dated 3 days ago. Where did he transfer it? An offshore account. His lawyer says it's perfectly legal. According to these contracts, Jake was the managing partner, with full authority over company funds. I read through the partnership agreement, my construction-trained eye picking out the details that mattered. Laura had signed over complete financial control to her brother in exchange for a promise of 50% of future profits. It was the kind of deal that sounded generous until you realized it gave Jake the power to make sure there were never any profits to share. "You signed this?" Laura nodded miserably. "Jake said it was standard. He said it would protect us both." "Did you have a lawyer review it?" Jake said his lawyer had drawn it up to benefit both of us. He said getting a second opinion would just waste money on unnecessary legal fees. I set down the contract and looked at my wife, this woman who'd been so confident about her business sophistication, who'd dismissed my concerns as the worries of someone who didn't understand high finance. "Laura, this contract gives Jake complete control over every penny. You're not a partner, you're an investor with no voting rights and no guaranteed return." "I know that now," she snapped, some of her old fire returning. "But it's too late to do anything about it." "What about the properties? The Harrison Street development?" Laura's laugh was bitter as poison. "What properties? Jake never actually bought anything. He used Mom's money to pay for option agreements that expired last week. We don't own a single square foot of real estate." I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Danny had been right. Jake had played his sister like a violin, and she'd been too blinded by ambition to see the con until it was too late. "What does his lawyer say?" "His lawyer says Jake fulfilled all his contractual obligations. He explored investment opportunities, negotiated property deals, and made business decisions within his authority as managing partner. The fact that those decisions didn't generate profits isn't a legal issue. And the money he transferred offshore? Personal compensation for services rendered, plus reimbursement for business expenses. Again, perfectly legal according to the contract I signed." I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the suburban street where we'd built our life together. 3 months ago, Laura had looked out this same window and seen a prison. Now I wondered if she was beginning to understand what she'd lost. "How much is left?" I asked. "Nothing. Jake cleaned out every account before he disappeared. We don't even have enough to pay this month's bills." The irony was almost too perfect. Laura had been so eager to escape her small, safe life that she'd handed over everything to a con man, who happened to be her brother. Now she was facing the kind of financial ruin that would make our old problems look like minor inconveniences. Where is Jake now? Nobody knows. His phone goes straight to voicemail. His apartment is empty. His office says he's taking an extended leave of absence. I turned back to face Laura, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was looking at the woman I'd married. The arrogance was gone, replaced by fear and regret, and the dawning realization of what her choices had cost us. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. Laura's composure finally cracked. "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. I thought I was so smart, so sophisticated. I thought I understood business better than everyone else, and I let my own brother steal everything." She buried her face in her hands and started crying with the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that come from the bottom of someone's soul. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to hold her and tell her we'd figure it out together. But a larger part of me remembered the way she dismissed our friends, our life, our marriage, in pursuit of Jake's empty promises. "Laura, I need you to be honest with me about something." She looked up, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "What?" "If Jake's plan had worked, if you'd made millions in commercial real estate, would you still be married to me?" The question hung in the air between us like a sword. Laura opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. The silence stretched on until it became an answer in itself. "I don't know," she whispered finally. At least she was being honest. For the first time in months, my wife was telling me the truth about what she really wanted. "Well," I said, "I guess that makes this easier." "Makes what easier?" I walked to the kitchen drawer where we kept important papers and pulled out a folder I'd been preparing for weeks. Inside were financial statements, business records, and a legal document that Laura was about to become very familiar with. "Divorce papers," I said, setting the folder on the table next to Jake's worthless contracts. Laura stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "Mike, no. We can work through this. We can rebuild. Rebuild what? A marriage where you're embarrassed by your husband? A partnership where my opinion doesn't matter? A life where you're constantly looking for something better than what we have together? I made mistakes. I see that now. But we can fix this." I sat back down across from her, studying the face I'd loved for 15 years. She was still beautiful, still the woman who'd captured my heart in college, but beauty wasn't enough to rebuild trust, and regret wasn't the same thing as love. "Laura, 3 months ago, you told me you didn't miss our old life at all. You said you wanted something more than what we had together. Well, now you're free to find it. But I don't want to find it anymore. I want what we had." "No, you don't. You want what we had because it's safe, because Jake took away all your other options. But if another opportunity came along tomorrow, another chance to build something bigger and better, you'd take it, and you'd leave me behind again." Laura reached across the table and grabbed my hands. "That's not true. I love you, Mike. I've always loved you." "Maybe, but you don't respect me. You don't value what I've built or what I bring to our partnership, and I can't live with someone who sees me as a consolation prize." I pulled my hands free and stood up. "The papers are pretty straightforward. I'm not asking for alimony or trying to take anything that's yours. I just want out." "Where will you go?" "I'll figure it out. I always do." I walked toward the stairs, then stopped and turned back. Laura was still sitting at the table, staring at the divorce papers like they might disappear if she looked at them hard enough. "For what it's worth," I said, "I'm sorry Jake did this to you. Nobody deserves to be betrayed by family." "Mike, please, don't do this. We can start over. We can build something new together." I looked at my wife one last time, memorizing her face, trying to hold on to the good memories before they were completely overshadowed by everything that had gone wrong. "We already built something together, Laura. It just wasn't enough for you." I went upstairs and started packing. By morning, I was gone, and the life we'd shared for 15 years was officially over. Laura could keep the house, the memories, and the expensive lesson her brother had taught her about the difference between ambition and wisdom. As for me, I had work to do and a future to build, and this time, I was going to build it with people who valued what I brought to the table. The first call I made was to Danny Morrison. The second was to a lawyer. The third was to a real estate agent who specialized in commercial properties. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from watching Laura and Jake's spectacular failure, it was this. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being successful on your own terms. And I was just getting started. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting in my new office above Murphy's hardware store, reviewing the contracts that would change everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same building Jake had planned to demolish for his commercial development project, the one that had never existed except in his imagination. When Old Man Murphy heard about Laura and Jake's scheme, he'd called me personally. "Mike, I know you're going through a rough time, but I've got a proposition for you. I'm thinking about expanding the business, maybe adding a contractor supply division. You interested in partnering up?" Murphy's Hardware had been a fixture on Harrison Street for 60 years. 3 generations of the Murphy family had built relationships with every contractor, handyman, and weekend warrior in the county. It was exactly the kind of small, honest business that Jake had dismissed as unsophisticated. It was also profitable, stable, and perfectly positioned for growth. "What did you have in mind?" I'd asked. "You know construction better than anyone in town. I know retail and customer service. Together, we could build something special, a one-stop shop for contractors and homeowners alike." The partnership agreement Murphy's lawyer had drawn up was everything Jake's contract with Laura hadn't been: fair, transparent, and designed to benefit both parties equally. I'd had my own lawyer review every word, and Danny had looked over the financial projections with the careful eye of someone who'd been burned by big promises before. "This could really work," Danny had said. "Murphy's got the customer base, you've got the expertise, and together you've got enough capital to make it happen." Now, 6 months later, Murphy and Sullivan Construction Supply was exceeding every projection we'd made. The contractor supply division was booming, my construction business was busier than ever, and I was building the kind of success that Jake had promised Laura, but never delivered. The best part was that I was doing it with people who respected what I brought to the table. Murphy valued my construction knowledge, my relationships with local contractors, my understanding of what working people actually needed. He didn't see me as unsophisticated. He saw me as essential. My phone rang, interrupting my review of the quarterly profit reports. It was Danny. "Hey, Mike, you busy?" "Just going over some paperwork." "What's up?" "Lisa wanted me to invite you to dinner Sunday. She's making that pot roast you like, and Emma's been asking when Uncle Mike is coming over again." Since the divorce, the Morrisons had become even closer friends. Lisa had been furious when she learned how Laura had treated me, and she'd made it her mission to make sure I didn't spend too many evenings alone in my new apartment. "Tell Lisa I'll be there." "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. Oh, and Mike, there's something else. Lisa has a friend she wants you to meet." I laughed. "Danny, I'm not ready for that yet. It's been 6 months. And this isn't a setup, exactly. Lisa's friend Jennifer is a teacher at Emma's school. She's divorced, has a 10-year-old daughter, and she's been asking about you." "Asking what about me?" "Whether you're as nice as you seem. Whether you're really single. Whether you might be interested in having coffee with a woman who appreciates men who show up when they say they will." I considered it. Jennifer was attractive, intelligent, and kind. I'd met her at several school events, and she'd always been warm and friendly, without being pushy. She was also nothing like Laura. Content with her teaching job, devoted to her daughter, unimpressed by flashy displays of wealth or status. "Maybe," I said, "but no pressure, okay?" "If it happens, it happens." "Understood. See you Sunday." After Danny hung up, I went back to the profit reports, but my mind was wandering. For the first time since the divorce, I was starting to think about the future in terms of possibilities rather than problems. The business was thriving, my friendships were stronger than ever, and maybe, just maybe, I was ready to consider sharing my life with someone again. Someone who valued the same things I did. Someone who understood that a good life wasn't about impressing other people or chasing the next big opportunity. Someone who could be happy with honest work, genuine friendship, and the simple pleasure of building something together. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Laura. We hadn't spoken since the day I'd moved out, but I sometimes wondered how she was managing on her own. Instead, it was Murphy. "Mike, just got off the phone with the city planning office. They approved our expansion proposal. Looks like we're going to need that bigger warehouse after all." I smiled and typed back, "Great news. I'll call the contractor tomorrow." As I locked up the office and headed home to my apartment, I reflected on how much my life had changed in less than a year. I'd lost a marriage, but I'd gained a business partnership that was built on mutual respect and shared values. I'd lost a wife, but I'd kept the friends who really mattered. I'd lost the house I'd renovated with my own hands, but I'd found something more valuable: self-respect. The apartment was small but comfortable, furnished with pieces I'd chosen for myself, rather than trying to impress anyone else. The refrigerator was stocked with beer and leftover pizza. The television was tuned to the game instead of reality shows about rich housewives. The bookshelves held construction manuals and mystery novels instead of business magazines and investment guides. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Sunday dinner at the Morrisons was exactly what I needed. Lisa's pot roast was perfect. Emma regaled us with stories about her second-grade teacher, and Danny and I talked about expanding the construction crew to handle all the new business we were getting. Jennifer arrived just as we were finishing dessert, bringing homemade cookies and an easy smile that lit up the room. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked like exactly what she was, a working mom who'd stopped by to visit friends. "Mike, you remember Jennifer," Lisa said, with the subtle enthusiasm of a matchmaker who was trying not to be obvious. "Of course. How are you, Jennifer?" "I'm good. Emma's been telling my daughter Sophie all about your construction projects. Apparently, you're building the most amazing treehouse in the Peterson family's backyard." I laughed. "It's just a simple platform with a ladder and some railings. Nothing too fancy." Sophie would disagree. She's been begging me to ask if you might have time to look at our backyard. We have this old oak tree that she thinks would be perfect for a treehouse. I'd be happy to take a look. Treehouses are one of my favorite projects. We talked easily for the next hour, about our kids, our work, our hopes for the future. Jennifer was funny and smart and refreshingly honest about the challenges of single parenthood. She didn't try to impress me with stories about her ambitions or her plans for conquering the world. She just talked about the life she was living and the simple pleasures she found in it. When she got ready to leave, I walked her to her car. "Thank you for the cookies," I said, "and for the conversation. It's been a while since I've talked to someone who actually listens." Jennifer smiled. "It's been a while since I've talked to someone worth listening to. Would you like to have coffee sometime? When we're not being set up by our well-meaning friends. I'd like that very much." As I watched her drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate hope of someone trying to salvage a failing relationship, but the quiet confidence of someone who is ready to build something new with the right person. Back inside, Lisa was practically bouncing with excitement. "So, what did you think?" "I think she's lovely," I said honestly, "and I think I'm finally ready to find out what comes next." Danny raised his beer in a toast. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I agreed. As I drove home that night, I thought about Laura and wondered if she'd found what she was looking for. I hoped she had, genuinely. I hoped she'd learned from Jake's betrayal and found a way to rebuild her life on a foundation of something more solid than ambition and image. But mostly, I thought about the future I was building for myself. A business based on mutual respect and shared values. Friendships that had been tested and proven strong. And maybe, if I was lucky, a relationship with someone who understood that the best things in life weren't about impressing other people or chasing the next big opportunity. They were about showing up, doing the work, and building something together that would last. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be. And I was ready to see what came next.